Earlier, we touched on Telesur, the South American news channel that interviewed Julian Assange. Telesur first went on the air back in 2005. Like other relatively new international news channels, such as Russia's RT, Iran's Press TV, China's CCTV, and France 24, Telesur is government-backed. Inspired by Venezuela's President Hugo Chavez and jointly funded by other left-wing governments across the region, the channel was designed to provide an alternative to Latin America's privately owned media conglomerates, the bulk of which lean to the political right. Now, depending on who's writing the reviews, Telesur is either a pioneering and much-needed media voice or a mere propaganda tool for Chavez and his political allies. The Listening Post's Marcela Pizarro now on Telesur and whether it's worth watching.
The brainchild of Venezuela's President Hugo Chavez, supported by left-wing leaders and governments including Cuba, Bolivia, Ecuador and Argentina. Latin America's pan-regional TV news channel, Telesur. If you wanted to see Latin America's so-called 21st century socialist revolution, this is where it's being televised.
Telesur, la señal informativa de América Latina.
The motto of Telesur itself is, our north is the south. That is to say, the objective is to tell the south about the south by the south itself. That's something that has never been done in the past.
Telesur is the most Latin American channel across the region's media landscape. We offer 24-hour information from all the countries in our region. And that means that Latin Americans have access to a much more accurate way of seeing themselves. 7 years since the start, Telesur continues with its aim, information for integration.
The basic concept of Telesur is great. Latin Americans informing themselves about what is happening in the region without having to pass through the US media lens. It's the alternative to what CNN and other transnational channels do.
So when audiences tune into Telesur, what they see on their screens is different. Extensive coverage of social movements around Latin America and beyond. Roundtable discussions on the Western world's financial crisis. Documentaries highlighting the plight of the continent's indigenous peoples. And as for news on the region, what you see on Telesur is not what you would see elsewhere on Latin America's mostly privately owned conservative media. A defining moment for Telesur was the 2009 overthrow of the left-wing president in Honduras, Manuel Zelaya.
What makes it different is how Telesur has covered each story differently. In Honduras, we showed how the president was taken from his house by force. And we broke the hegemonic discourse of other media outlets. We also had the cameras on when the army attacked the crowds of Zelaya's supporters when they demanded his return. We told the story from the point of view of the people on the ground, unlike the rest of the media.
Having come into being to provide a Latin American alternative to news organizations like CNN Español, Telesur now finds itself at the heart of a media conflict that we've reported on extensively here at the Listening Post. From one end of the continent to the other, left-wing governments in Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru, Argentina are all at odds with the mainstream media in those countries. And most of those media outlets are backed by the political right.
The mainstream media dominates the waves in Latin America. CNN and others, most of the private media tends to identify with the people who are against the left. It's about 6 or 7 companies that control about 80 to 85% of the news.
There's no doubt that big media groups dominate Latin America. But outlets that want to provide a counterweight to that media power need to have solid professional standards and not just rely on left-wing discourse. They need to have high-quality output that actually engages the audience.
However, to engage an audience, you have to find one. Telesur has a distribution problem. It's had trouble making deals with regional cable companies and has even claimed it's a victim of a boycott. In 2008, the channel said it was reaching 3 million homes by cable, about 1/4 of CNN Español's audience. There are also questions about funding. When the channel launched, governments around the region pledged money. But ask Telesur who funds the channel today, and the story gets murky, which only goes to reinforce the notion that Telesur is Tele-Chávez in disguise.
Pero estamos transmitiendo en vivo y en directo por Telesur.
Then there's the issue of editorial balance and credibility.
Yo no veo las cosas de una manera equilibrada.
I don't think it's balanced at all. It's the same as all the other propaganda projects Chávez has. It would be marvelous if Telesur could be the voice of all Latin Americans. But it's not. It's just one voice.
Propaganda del presidente Chávez.
Canal con una
The channel is very biased on certain issues in Latin America, and I think that's reduced its credibility. Telesur has ended up being a niche reference for the left.
Cristina Fernández cuestionó las recetas neoliberales de ajuste económico.
la política neoliberal.
But it's not managed to transcend this and become a key information supplier for the region.
En toda América Latina.
There's little doubt that the channel reflects the Venezuelan government's own politics, and sometimes its foreign policy. During the Arab Spring, if Gaddafi and Assad were looking for positive coverage,
Bashar al-Assad, desde aquí los saludamos.
they found it on Telesur.
O sea, nosotros logramos.
We broadcast live out of Green Square in Tripoli and show that it had not been bombarded by Gaddafi, contrary to other news reports. We were in Egypt, Tunisia, in Libya, where we had coverage which broke the dominant discourse of Latin American media, but also media worldwide.
Fíjate que con el tema de los
Venezuela's own foreign policies have been reflected in Telesur's coverage of the Arab Spring. Coverage has been benevolent with some dictatorships, like the case of Libya, and while the rest of the world has condemned the killings in Syria, the Venezuelan government is sending Assad fuel, and I think Telesur's coverage is just reproducing its government's policy in a slightly more opaque way.
Some viewers are looking for different perspectives on global events.
¿Cuáles son de verdad las causas que provocan que países cercanos como Qatar y Arabia Saudí estén apoyando a esta oposición?
But Telesur's coverage on Venezuela itself has left many thinking the channel lost its way. And this year's presidential elections in Venezuela will show how objective this so-called international news channel really is.
The only people funding Telesur are the governments that support Chávez. And we're not seeing the candidates standing against Chávez in the presidential campaign. It's completely disproportionate.
Absolutas, ¿no?
Podrán ver como lo están viendo.
Our viewers will be able to see coverage of different candidates. We will have special coverage, and we will be broadcasting results live. It's a big challenge, though, and I assure you, no one will offer the coverage we have. It's going to be very nuanced and totally comprehensive.
Comprehensive, but will it be balanced? And can it bring in a wider audience? Or will Telesur be preaching to the converted?